It's 5:15. I'd like to call the October Planning Commission meeting to order. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Changes to the agenda, Dave.
We're all set on the agenda.
I'd look for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Jamie made it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? For approval of the September 15th meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Adam? Okay, looks like comprehensive plan
Gotta
ready to
vote
go,
on
huh?
Bob, you want to call the vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Now we're ready for comprehensive plan. Stand towards the mic here. Good evening, everyone. Just quickly wanted to personally thank you, as does my wife, for moving your meeting day up a date. That way I can have a nice 21st anniversary dinner tomorrow night. I've probably hit those about 30% of the time, given my career. So a little bit helps there. We're kind of nearing the end of this process, not too much more to go through. And I think we're expected to stay on schedule. We'll talk about the next meeting towards the end here. But it's looking like we're on track to get the plan adopted, or at least in front of the council towards the beginning of next year. A couple of elements we wanted to run through this evening to kind of fill in a few holes, issues and opportunities, and then we'll talk about the population and housing. Issues and opportunities, if you had a chance to look through that, not a lot of new information or exciting stuff in here. It's really just kind of documenting a lot about the background of the community and the public participation process. So there's a few dates that'll need to be filled in on page 4 regarding the public process and the adoption. So those will be cleaned up at the end. But we did want to share with any reader at least a synopsis of some of the efforts that were made to either identify issues through this plan commission, and the SWOT analysis and the summary is included in there, as well as the summary of the survey results. The entire survey and the results will be included as an appendix in the report, so the reader will have access to that. And then there were at the very end on page 11, just a couple of policies, and those are pretty basic. Really no need to change them, in my opinion. And hopefully, you know, the city will continue to adhere to those things. So with that, we can go through that pretty quick, and I'll leave it open for any questions, discussion, concerns, changes.
On page 8, there was just one little, right here, if you look up at the screen up there, you got
Got a straight S.
a straight S.
Good eyes. We'll take care of that. And of
I
course,
don't know if you were missing a sentence continuation or what.
I'll double check, but sometimes that happens, and spell checks apparently didn't catch that. We will be making sure we give it a pretty good proofread as we pull the final draft together for public review, but inevitably, once you print something, you find something right away. So, okay. Any other thoughts or questions on that element? If not, we can move on to the next item. Very good. Talk about population and housing. I would say normally we like to try and do this element towards the front end so that we in the community has a good idea of at least expectations for growth and changes in population and housing. But as we stated early on in the process, the 2020 census data is still not available and probably won't be until early next year. I'm guessing it's been held back probably for political reasons with elections and midterms coming up. So we'll let them play their games, I guess. But we were basically forced to use the 2016 to 2020 ACS, the 5-year estimates, which do have to some degree a margin of error associated with it. And while data such as this is important in the planning process, I always tell my communities, don't hang your hat on it completely. There's a lot of other factors that come into play with respect to land use and how a community grows, and a lot of other factors that can alter figures that are in a report such as this. But I do want to hit some highlights and expand on a few of these items. So if we take a look simply at page 2, with historical population, I think it's fair to say that the city of New London has had some steady growth over the last number of decades. There hasn't been a lot of low periods. Maybe with the recession in 2008, you felt a little pinch, but who didn't in that? But even between 2020 and 2022 and the preliminary estimates, you've had a decent increase in population. If we turn to page 3, we have forecasts there utilizing some DOA data, which is fairly dated. So again, this is not the end all be all, but you'll notice, and I do know looking at DOA's data for a lot of communities and smaller communities that are out maybe in a rural setting, we do see declines after 2035 in population. Again, I think in terms of looking at doing year plan and accommodating growth and development, we want to plan for that peak population, which occurs in 2035. Whether or not it declines by 2040 is anyone's guess. I think historically, as DOA did projections, they factored in the aging population, some of the statewide patterns regarding migration of people from the rural areas to the urban areas, and that factors into it. But again, there could be a lot of things that change that figure. Simply the expansion of Highway 15 and more accessibility might bring some additional growth that wasn't contemplated in doing this kind of academic exercise. So again, I always kind of preach, these are projections, not predictions. And many things can kind of move that. But looking forward, you're going to continue to have some slow but steady growth. And I think that's, if I remember correctly from survey results, a lot of people kind of wanted that. They didn't want too much, they didn't want too little. So hopefully what occurs here will be just right. As we, go ahead.
What's all the immigration stuff? What's that going to do to the population?
Well, that's certainly a factor in things, and that can alter the population. I mean, you know, there's a lot of federal debates going on regarding immigration, and certainly I think from just a general workforce standpoint, immigration is probably a necessity. But if and when immigrants do come in, where they end up residing is to some degree anybody's guess. Occasionally we do get a boost in population in Wisconsin or Northeast Wisconsin from refugee populations. But you know, I don't think those policies are going to affect New London a great deal, but it's something to kind of keep your eye on.
Thank you.
Good question. From the population, we can translate and look at households and the formation of households and household projections. I think the first thing to point out here is your persons per household. Like many communities, the households are getting smaller. You're getting more dynamic households that have different makeups than they used to historically, more single parent families, more single people just living alone, whether they're young people, whether they're aging, variety of reasons for that. So the household formation drastically impacts household projections and development projections. Again, based on these figures and using some of that DOA data, we're looking at a peak in about 2035. And again, whether that declines or not in 5 years after that, anybody's guess, for the same reasons we talked about population. But really looking at, give or take, about an increase of 200 or maybe a bit more in terms of households. If we turn to page 4, age distribution, this again can have an effect on the households and the kinds of households that are formed in general. And I was a bit surprised, but you've got an estimated median age of about 36.2 years. And that's actually a little bit on the lower end of many communities I have been working for. And some communities are pushing into the 40s and mid 40s. So and to some degree, you've got a little bit younger population here as compared to probably the region as a whole. We do expect that population distribution to change a bit. Aging of the population, obviously, you're seeing that in a lot of communities where the age, 60 plus, those figures percentage wise and number wise are likely to grow. And so we've discussed that, I think, in the past with needs for senior housing, assisted living, and those types of facilities. And that should certainly continue to stay on your radar as time moves forward.
And I think that's one good point, that years ago, I was under the impression, from what I've heard, we have an older population. We have a retirement population in New London.
Mhm.
This is not showing that, not at all.
No, it's partly maybe because you've been able to attract families or people that happen to have families and have some younger kids that help balance that out. It could be tied to your manufacturing based jobs and attracting younger workers to the area because there's some good employment. And I always have to remind myself, I mean, millennials are getting old now, but we always used to think, millennials want to be in the city and they want to be in a downtown environment. You kind of forget, some of them grew up with a rural background and like the rural areas. I think maybe your evidence that some of the younger folks have stuck around or younger folks have moved in simply because of the resource base, the amenities, that they like to hunt, they like to fish, do those things. And obviously you've got some semblance of a good community here. It's not downtown Appleton, but it's not Black Creek either, for that matter. So I think the things that you're doing in terms of downtown will help to continue to attract a younger population, give them something to do that fits their lifestyle. Challenge, as always, is going to be matching that up with the housing, housing affordability. So, all right, we moved to page 5. Always like to kind of check in on just the average adjusted gross income, and that's been increasing steadily as it has within many areas. You're still lower than the state as a whole, and that's probably a reflection perhaps of manufacturing jobs. But again, you need to note this data is already somewhat dated. We know recently over the last few years that there have been some major shifts in employment compensation and wage increases across the board and the like. So, if we had numbers today, 2022 or 2023, I'd have to guess it'd be probably significantly higher than the 45,000, probably creeping into the low 50s, just a guess. But certainly you can make a livable wage here. We move on to page 6 and talk about housing itself and the housing stock that you have. Like many communities, you've got a lot that have been built basically since 1960 through the late 90s and the 2000s, and kind of getting into that building boom period we had before the Great Recession in 2008. And then you see a lot of things slow down. It doesn't matter what community you're looking at, things kind of halted once that hit and the housing bubble had burst. Took a while to recoup and recover from that. And that's kind of evidenced in your 2010 to 2013 number there, based on at least the census information. And then things have started to uptick after that. But again, you've got housing that's starting to, basic majority of your housing is in an older category. And to me, that says you need to be equally concerned about maintenance of the existing housing stock. Most of your affordable housing as it exists today is going to be in that older housing stock, and preserving it, maintaining it, ensuring that it's available for others down the road is going to be a key part of that. Structural characteristics, I think, as most folks know, majority of the housing units within the community are single family detached traditional homes. And that's true again of many communities out there. You have some decent numbers and smattering of 2-unit, 3, 4, and multiple family types of units here, which are spread actually fairly evenly. If you take a look at the next table on page 7, regarding building permits as of late. This goes back to 2014. You'll see that there's definitely a few upticks in multifamily units. And we've seen that proportionally in many communities in Northeast Wisconsin where community might have had, 80-20 split of permits between single family and some other multifamily use. And we're starting to see numbers now that are coming in more 50-50. Very few, but a couple out there I know are having more multifamily than they are single family. So that kind of goes with the trends that we've been seeing, anything ranging from millennials not wanting to own a house and have freedom. Instead, they're happy renting and things of that nature. If we take a look at just the occupancy characteristics, not a lot has changed here over time. You've been roughly 60 to 65% owner occupied versus renter. Although with the latest census data, the 2016 to 2020, it did show a decrease down about 53%. And that, again, I think is following a lot of the trends out there for the reasons that we talked about. And you may find over the next handful of years that you are approving or seeing more development in terms of rental units than you are owner occupied. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. Part of it is simply lifestyle and desires by people and how and where they want to live. But also now we need to factor in all the complications with the housing market, the supply chain, affordability, and the like. And we've got a few other figures in here related to that. Value. This again gets dated very quickly. And as you see here, just looking at that 5-year estimate data, there was a median value of about 142,000. And given what's happened in the housing market, you may be hard pressed to find something or a lot of things at that median. I did a quick, as indicated, I did a quick little check on Zillow just to gauge what things are going for out there, what values are being placed. And you still do have quite a few homes, probably the older stock in the 120 to 200,000 range. And so that may be a little more affordable than can be found in other communities or in the Fox Valley area. So that could be part of what helps to attract some growth. But looking at newer homes, yeah, 250, 350, 400,000 is not out of place anymore for what is your traditional, 1,600 square foot ranch home, for example. We've been looking at other data from various communities that we work with and engage with, and it's really disheartening, if not sickening, at sometimes to see how much people are paying for homes or have to pay for homes. So definitely a challenge.
Could it be that some of your younger people are looking to buy an older house and then fix it up until they get to the point where they can maybe trade it in and uptick?
I think that's always something that's out there. In fact, that's what my wife did twice. And but now folks are in a position that if they had the equity in the home, it's not doing them a lot of good, because if they sell the house, they have to go out and find another house, which is going to be at least as much, if not more. Not to mention you're going to be paying higher interest rates. So I just heard on the radio today, and I don't remember the numbers, but they were talking about a lot of folks who were intending on selling are pulling back now, and they're just going to stay where they're at until conditions change. So you might not have as much turnover, and that's going to continue to make the housing market tight because folks aren't giving up their homes. So. We go to the next page, 9, talk a little bit about affordability. And again, we've got some caveats with that 5-year estimate data here. But surprisingly, at least on the homeowners end of things, you've got roughly about 8, maybe 9%, certainly less than 10%, according to this data, that are spending more than 30% of their gross income on household costs, whether it's mortgage, insurance, taxes, and the like. That may be attributed a bit to generally some of the lower cost and the older housing stock that you have. But typically in many communities, we're seeing numbers more in the 15, 20, 25, 35% range in terms of homeowners and affordability. So you probably have it a little better off than most in your community. But again, that may not stay the same all the time, given all the things going on. Renting, a little bit different story there. And again, we know you've probably had more multifamily and rental units built, probably more than new homes recently. But according to this data, we're looking at about 31%, 32% that are struggling with affordability in terms of the gross rent and the percentage of their income. I know that personally from my son, who I just saw last Sunday. He lives down in Oconomowoc. He's lived in a 2-bedroom apartment for about 3 years. When he first rented the place, it was $900. Now he's paying $1,500. And that's getting him to, turn the gears in his head about buying a house, but of course, same issues. It's so expensive, you're paying additional interest that doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I think there's a lot of people, young folks that are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with respect to trying to make their housing costs more affordable. So page 10, this goes back and kind of ties into the household and population projections, but using the DOA data, looking at the ACS data, we are contemplating an increase of roughly 250, could be 200, could be 300 additional homes over the planning period here over the next little bit less than 20 years. So again, we're projecting some moderate growth, nothing overwhelming. I think it's something that can be managed. And then obviously we want to ensure that you've got enough vacant land allocated to accommodate this new development. So any questions up to that point or other comments, concerns, discussion areas? Okay. We talked about this, I think, during the land use chapter update where we tackled that separately, but on page 11, we wanted to expand a bit on housing for all income levels. And there's a concept called missing middle housing. And this is essentially sort of a nationwide trend that at some point we got very good at building traditional single family homes. We got good at building apartment complexes, and we forgot about all the stuff in between that used to be built that you'll see even in your older neighborhoods, 2 flats, traditional duplexes, triplexes. If you go to some larger cities, neighborhoods on the east side of Milwaukee, you'll see a wide variety of housing there, including 4 and 6 plexes that really blend in quite well. You know it's an apartment, but it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb like you see some of these multiple complexes that are built at one time. And this is something we've been recommending to a lot of communities, is to focus on that missing middle. These housing styles and these types can certainly be more affordable in a lot of respects. Developers seem to be appreciating opportunities to do more of these types of things because their numbers are going to pencil out better than doing traditional types of housing development. You know, this is kind of a guide and just saying that where possible, you should really be encouraging the development community and developers and others to really look at these different options. There's a number of ways communities have handled that. Some have just gotten rid of single family zoning completely and allow more intense residential development within a residential zoning district. It doesn't just have to be single family. We're working with a community right now that isn't going to bite on that and go that extreme, but we are creating a zoning category from them between single family and multifamily that will include and allow a variety of these types of homes and these densities in order to try and encourage more construction of those types of housing units. So there's challenges, but again, I think those that are concerned about higher density housing, I think a lot of those concerns can be addressed with design. And if you have good quality, good architecture, if you create a variety of housing styles in a single neighborhood instead of just cookie cutter that's the same ranch home or same duplex, you've all seen it. Maybe you've got some line of 7 duplexes in a row. Often wonder how those people find their right one at night when they come home. But kind of getting rid of the monotony that can happen and has happened over time in a lot of subdivisions, particularly in the Fox cities and other places, I think is the challenge. So this is something you're going to want to encourage, maybe even take some steps to require diversity within a new subdivision and not just have all the same types of things. So a few other thoughts on page 12, won't go into detail, but wanted to at least touch on and address housing for all age groups, redevelopment, rehabilitating the existing housing stock, like we had mentioned before. And then we get into the goals and objectives. And again, reviewing this, I think a lot of thought went into the preparation of the last plan without knowing we're going to have a big housing problem, at this point in time. But I didn't think a lot of changes were necessary here. And if the planning commission agrees, really, we've only looked at adding some additional references to that missing middle kind of concept and the encouragement of looking at some higher density, but not going to the big multifamily end and trying to get a lot of these things that are in between. So we've added that thought to objective 1A. On page 15, we've put that in one of the policies, a city position, and also a directive H7. And I think one last reference to that on the last page, page 16, as a recommendation pertaining to development review requirement. So, we wanted to try and at least ingrain that thought. Whether it happens because of the market forces or whether it happens because you as a community encourage or force some of those things to happen is really up to you from this point. But it's something that we're seeing done more and more in many communities. It's starting to help fill that gap, that affordability need. But it's not the silver bullet. I'm not going to stand here and preach it's the end all be all. It takes a lot of different things to make a community. But I do believe this missing middle concept can really get a community pretty far in addressing some of those issues at hand. So with that, are there any questions, any concerns, conversation? Is this a direction that we did kind of solidify that a little bit when we did the land use chapter, but this is another chance to kind of check in on that and make sure that is the direction that you want to go.
I found it interesting in reviewing this, and this was from the last one. I double checked it. And we've been talking about UDC codes and, our zoning for code enforcement. And Dave's been talking about rental housing inspection program, which I don't think we're doing today.
No.
But it's been talked about in the past, and it's right here. I mean, establish a rental and housing inspection program and then continue to enforce building codes. So, I mean, those are some challenges we've been talking about recently. It's been talked about in the past that we should be trying to accomplish these things. So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Point
I
out.
think the closest example of one of those would be Oshkosh. They spent a few years trying to get a rental inspection program. And I know when it was first proposed, it would be mandatory. Every 5 years, every rental property needs to be inspected. I just heard or read something recently though, but apparently they must have pulled back because it's voluntary now, but they're still having issues where tenants are afraid to call the city to get that inspection done because fear of retaliation, jacking up rent, kicking them out, those kinds of things. So, but I do know it got a lot of debate. It was not something favored by the landlords or slumlords or whatever you want to call them, at least down in Oshkosh. So if you're going to go that direction, do it cautiously, I think. And certainly, I think having some initial discussions with at least landlords that own multiple properties that you may know already, over a cup of coffee is probably better than just putting something together and throwing it out there.
Mhm.
So do you know of any community that has a rental housing inspection program?
Oshkosh is the only one that I'm aware of. There may be some others.
I think there's 7 or 8 that have attempted.
Yeah.
I know down by Milwaukee, they're doing some.
Doesn't Green Bay have something?
Yeah, I think it's a problem because you do have aging housing stock. And if you don't have kind of a dynamic program to get these properties up to code, they're just going to continue to fail. And like he talks, where these homes that were previously homeowner occupied are now rentals, the tenants don't have a vested interest in that property. So
Yeah.
the maintenance is on the owner. And if there isn't some onus on them to get those up to code.
Right.
Said Michigan's really probably way the other way, where it's pretty much mandatory in every
Really?
city there to have some type of rental inspection program. So, and like I said, it's a minimum housing standard where you're walking through like, okay, the water system's working like it's supposed to, furnace, electric. So you're not going in there trying to get a brand new home out of them, but you're trying to keep it at that minimum standard so the houses don't fall into decay where they're, got to be torn down or just
Right.
not a safe or weather resistant place to live in either. So, because utility
some-
bills could be crazy on some
somewhere
of
in
these
the
older homes with the
nineties, I
windows.
think it was, we tried to do this where when an apartment was vacant, before the new tenant could move in, we wanted to have inspections and we had a real blow up.
Yeah, yeah.
The landlords have really lobbied the state. They, it would take quite a bit of work to get something going. Now I do inspections now per request and I use a code to go in there and, okay, at least get it to this thing. So I just did one up the street here. They had about probably 12 or 15 violations in the house and
Is it the renter or the landlord calling you?
the renter.
Renters.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course there's a whole litany of reasons why they're calling. Sometimes it's because they're not paying rent, but
Yeah.
there was some electrical issues, some other safety issues in the house. So I think as a state, they're kind of missing the boat on this stuff, but like I said, to start in a smaller municipality like this probably wouldn't bode well. So you have to do some more lobbying at the state legislature to get that done.
It's a challenge for a lot of communities, but again, I think with the way the market is, communities are starting to understand their existing housing stock is probably of more value than worrying about new stuff being built. And I don't know what the future holds with the legislature and the lobbyists out there, but yeah, the landlord associations and others have been pretty vocal about this.
So with that being said, and just the challenges politically and just getting everybody on board, is that too strong of language for us right now? Should we be considering to establish it instead of saying that we are going to establish it?
Do we know, are we eligible for the housing rehabilitation programs that the state has? Is that some of those, like years ago, they had where you could get $10,000 and redo your roof or fix your furnace?
Do you mean the community development block grant
Is that
programs?
what it? I
I'm
know
assuming that's
It's
what you're
usually,
talking about.
it's usually where some of those dollars come from, and typically that's going to be income based. I think city as a whole does not meet those low to moderate income thresholds, but there probably are pockets in some neighborhoods, some census tracts that do. And most of the time that's going to contain some of your older housing stock as well. I can make a note and I can just double check on that. If we find that there are some pockets and census tracts that fit that, we can make mention of that in here and we could include a map and identify that.
And we do have some people that have taken advantage of that. We have someone in Clintonville that manages it all for us. If I got questions, I just send the questions to her right away, but
Yeah.
so I don't know, what details we have on it, but we do have some people that have taken advantage of that.
Yeah. You know, something that's been going on in the Fox Cities for some time, I don't think it's happened out here, but Habitat for Humanity has been doing these Rock the Block events. Have they done anything out here?
Last
They
year.
have? Did you? Okay, great. Yeah. Well, it sounds familiar now. But programs like that are invaluable and can really make a big difference really quickly to people in an entire block visually. So,
And Habitat actually owns a lot in New London that in the next couple of years, we've been kind of working with them a little bit, that they are going to build a Habitat house in New London, so.
I don't remember if we talked about this before or not, but it occurred to me as well that talking with your major businesses in the community about affordable housing, you know, they may be suffering for employees because there isn't affordable housing, but we've seen more and more corporate entities contributing to a community and to help solve the problem. We know some companies have given money and land and just say, build me some housing. We need it. You can't specifically reserve that housing for their employees if you're doing this publicly, but the thought is at least some would go into those areas. Same thing could happen with maintenance and rehab. I haven't seen it yet. The focus has been on new housing, but maybe you've got some corporations that are willing to to help maintain the community and contribute a little bit so you can develop your own program, use it as some matching funds to leverage other grant funds, for example, to do the things needed for the older housing stock.
There was something in the Sheboygan area where some businesses just got on board with that. And I think with their Economic Development Corporation County, I don't know if you're
Yep.
aware of that one.
Yep.
There was some, just what you're talking about, some big donors and helped out spur some of that development.
Yep. I know in Green Bay, I think one or more of some of the meat packing plants too gave some money and land to the city in hopes of getting some housing built. I know I just drove down past Quad Graphics on Highway 33 as you go west for 41, and there's a newer subdivision there. I don't think there's sewer and water, so it must be on on-site systems, but I can only guess by the name of it and the proximity that Quad Graphics built a subdivision for their employees. Now, I'm hoping it's not like the old days where they use that to leverage and chain the employees to work there forever kind of thing. But we're starting to see more and more businesses get involved in that housing aspect. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So
I think Aaron's Corporation in Brilliant did something.
They were doing,
They
that's
were-
right, Berlin, they were doing something
Yeah.
on it. Aaron's was.
Aaron's is doing for sure. They're doing that Olympic
Yeah,
sport training complex.
Mhm.
And then they've got a beautiful rental facility on, I think it was Round Lake and stuff that I don't know if they've done housing per se yet, but they're investing in Brilliant by far.
in the community.
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And they're involved in that whole Brilliant Works, the old Ironworks site, which they've kind of got master plan, does include some housing, but I don't know if Aaron's themselves will be contributing to that housing at all. So again, when you got a nice sugar daddy in town like that, you know, it's,
The community look
nice to
more-
see.
more attracted to people to come in.
yeah, yeah. And they got a lot going for them in terms of geography and proximity, much like you folks do. I mean, it's short drive to Manitowoc, to the Fox Cities, or even Green Bay for working. I mean, they've certainly got, Aaron's has some interest, obviously, in maintaining or attracting employees for their facility, I'm sure, as part of this, whether they say that outright or not, you have to understand that's got to be one of their motivations too.
I think they did say that they needed to, you know,
No.
develop good employees and have a community where they wanted to live.
Yeah.
And so they weren't hesitating
Yeah.
to talk about the need.
Well, they've done a lot of effort in their community, in the downtown and everything over the years. If you were there 20 years ago, it was drastically different. So still wish they'd put a roundabout in at PP and Highway 10 instead of a four-way stop, but too late. Well, I'll definitely look into the some of the grant funding and low to moderate income piece. And if there's something good to share here, we'll include that in this element and make sure it's pointed out. So,
Well, and if we've got some of those programs, we should be letting people know.
yeah, or providing information if there's some other things residents can tap into as individuals
Yeah.
through the state or county or other things. So.
We kind of got that with the downtown, or we have the matching funds for businesses downtown.
Mhm.
Kind of similar to
A
it.
facade program. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you let them know, they use it, you know.
Any other thoughts, questions, concerns?
I really am interested in that missing middle. I just don't know how you would encourage growth in there. You have corporate developers like SC Sadrisky comes in, they want to build 98 unit apartment complexes because they got bean counters that say, hey, we need this and we need this to have a profit.
Yeah.
And you have people that if you're going to build a home, you're up to $350,000, $400,000. Why would I do a duplex? I want the home to be mine.
Yeah.
You know, the cost is so high to build, a duplex or fourplex. So I'd be really interesting to see what other communities are doing to probably, to encourage that kind of growth, because it just doesn't work today because cost of buildings are so high.
Yeah, no, economies of scale definitely come into play even more so now than they did, 20 years ago. and there's only so much a community can do to help, their bottom line, so to speak. I mean, we all understand developers need to make a profit. That's a given. It'd be nice if they made less of a profit and gave more to the community, but that doesn't often happen. But really on your end, what you can control is lot size. The smaller the lot, theoretically, the more affordable the house is going to be. In some communities, the lot itself can be a third of the price of buying a new home. So the density comes into play in terms of extending sewer and roads and things that might tie to assessments and affordability. We've had communities, very few, but thinking about maximum lot sizes instead of minimum lot sizes. So you're forcing them you can only go so big with the lots to maintain affordability. Doing the variety of homes, I think is also something that makes a neighborhood nice. And you can have a $500,000 home next to I'll call it a $250,000 home. And if the neighborhood's well designed, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You're not talking about those people versus these people kind of thing. To me, variety is the spice of life, and we've lost a lot of that in our developments, and I think we've lost a lot of sense of community because of that. So, but anything you can do on your end to ease the cost burden on the developers, including development process. Looking at efficiencies, the longer it takes them to go through that development process, the longer they have holding costs and other things that can really affect the bottom line and whether things pencil out or not.
And that's exactly what that Fox Cities Housing Forum that I went to talked about, what we can do on a municipal level to encourage that growth. And then the League of Wisconsin Municipalities put out that information of what municipalities can do for zoning. For example, we don't allow 0 lot line setbacks for a townhouse situation. So we could look at, and we talked about, we need to change our zoning code. We got to update our zoning code. So for us to be able to allow some of these things would help develop some of that missing middle as well. Like you talked about the lot sizes. Maybe our lot sizes are too big right now to encourage some of the middle growth.
That seems to be what is missing for New London. It really does. The SC Swiderski development going up is going to really fill a major hole, I feel. I'm hearing a lot of positive in the community, some negative. Interestingly enough, the negative isn't coming from people that would rent from there anyway.
I had the same.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot of positive coming from that. But what I'm hearing, the negative, those people that wouldn't rent from there are the people that are would be looking for the missing middle housing. So that feels like that's a niche that we really need to be looking at moving forward.
That's a very true statement. Absolutely.
If I won the lottery or had the wherewithal, I swear, if you go and stamp out about 700 to 800 square foot small starter homes, they go like that.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge to even build a small house like that for a couple $100,000 nowadays. So, but I still don't see a lot of developers going with things that small. They're still got the mindset you need 1,300 square feet minimum.
What's the tiny home, average?
Tiny homes. I mean, the ones on trailers, 300 to 500 square feet at most, depending, but somewhere around 300 to 400, I think, on average. But even then, you could spend $100,000 really easy building one of those.
I think we really need to take a serious look at New London and the availability of, because we're on the swamp here and, what is seriously available and what'll fit there. And then go for broke to fill those needs. So,
Agreed.
we have a lot to offer. It's just.
We're seeing more interest in these development of these pocket neighborhoods, or in some cases, what they'll call cottage courts that do actually include fairly small homes, so 600, 700 to 1,000 square feet, maybe at most, and they're clustered. They're individually owned, but it's like building a small neighborhood. And that seems to be more acceptable to people. Maybe it's the design aspects, maybe that many of them are owner occupied versus renter, although it should be immaterial. But they seem to be attractive. Again, I think a couple have gone up in Oshkosh area. We've been working with the Village of Bellevue right in our backyard on a comp plan update, and I took the opportunity. I found this little piece of land that's kind of odd shaped and out in the middle of nowhere, and just for interest sketched out maybe what a cottage court development could look like. And on about 12 acres of land, we stuck about 16 little homes on it, and there's a huge green space that the homes line up against, and it could be beautiful. And their ad hoc committee doing the comp plan kind of fell in love with it. Said, yeah, that's cool. We should be doing more of that. Talking with others out there, you can go even beyond that. There's been some of these cottage court kind of developments that I think they've been attracting more an older retired population versus younger at this point. But some communities apparently have offered incentives that if you're a CNA and you want to move into this cottage court, we'll give you some incentives or a discount, because it'd be great if the older population had someone nearby that could help out when needed. So folks are starting to get real creative on some of these developments. Just don't see a lot of it around Northeast Wisconsin, unfortunately. There are always stories from other places.
Well, I think if you have the space and someone comes in and said, I want to build small houses, you know, you can say, well, we have this, like you said, show them where they could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they've got the vision in their head already, they'll
Yeah.
can expand. We don't have to draw the plans, but show them here, this is available.
And that, to that point, I think that's becoming more important with many communities, is simply the marketing aspect of opportunities to do something different. We've been talking and working with a number of communities that are struggling to get residential development. They don't have contacts with developers, and looking at how we can support them in marketing properties. And part of it is kind of getting their act together, making sure that the site is shovel ready, much like the industrial sites for the New North Gold Shovel program, making sure there's no encumbrances, environmental issues. And you need to put it out there. You need to kind of wave it in front of the developers and say, hey, we're open for business. We want this stuff. Come talk to us. And a lot of communities aren't used to doing that. A lot of communities aren't used to doing that well for just industrial properties. So doing it for residential is a whole nother animal. Maybe to sum things up, all hope is not lost here. I think you got a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of challenges, but I think the success of your community is going to hinge a lot on how you deal with housing first and foremost. And many communities are now really understanding that housing is economic development. If we don't have the housing, we're not going to have the job growth and industry growth and those kind of things. So if there's any recommendations, as we look through this and pull everything together for the implementation chapter, I'm going to kind of keep an eye out, because, literally there's probably 100 recommendations throughout this entire plan, and you can't do it all. So I want to try and think and highlight maybe the top 10 things. And no disrespect to your council, I haven't worked with them a lot, but I think the message from the Plan Commission, when you approve the report, eventually give it to the council, is there's a lot of stuff in here, but if you do nothing, if you don't do anything, we're not going to change. And if you do nothing else, at least look at these 10 items and see if you can move the needle on those 10 items. So,
If you go drive on the highways coming into New London in the morning or at night when people are through with work, there's as much traffic coming into New London as there is going out.
Yeah.
So if we could keep some of that traffic that's going out to stay here. So.
I think last time we just discussed that.
yeah, the economic development element has that chart and graphic showing about half leaving for the day and half coming in from other places. And that's kind of what you might measure success by, is can you get that number to change? And again, some of that is probably tied to housing.
Yep.
So. All right, well, good, good discussion, and sounds like everyone's kind of comfortable still in the direction that we're moving. So what's next is essentially coming back to the plan commission with the implementation element. We'll consolidate all those recommendations, update that, and like I said, we'll try and figure out maybe what those top 10 things are so there can be some good focus moving forward. We will want to take a look at the land use chapter and the future land use map. I'll probably end up consulting quite a bit with Chad and with Dave on both those elements between now and the next meeting, because most of the implementation tasks will typically fall to a staff person, perhaps a committee, and they'll have probably some good judgment on what's going to fit best. But of course, you'll have a chance to review that. We'll also work closely with them to take a look at the future land use map. If you've got a copy of it from previous meeting, or go online and take a look at it, I would encourage you between now and the next meeting to kind of stare at that. And in the context of everything that we've gone through in terms of information and conversations, see if there's something physical out there on the map that you think, boy, if we tweak this just a little bit, or we did that, or added this over here, it might help things. You know the community probably better than I do, and some of those little interesting areas that might be opportunistic. You know, I think we went through that with a pretty fine tooth comb with the last project, but there's always something that could change.
So just remember, remind everybody where it's at. If you're on the city's homepage, you can click on business and then economic development, and then scroll down to the proposed chapter 8 amendment, which is the land use. Click on that, it'll should come up with our chapter 8 land use. So that's where you can go to find it again.
And we'll mail that back out before our meeting, but if you want to look at it in the interim, be great. So speaking of meetings, before I leave, can we talk about when we want to schedule that next meeting?
Yeah, so the next one, next regular one would be on Thanksgiving, so we want to move that around a little bit.
We're looking at the 17th.
What do you want to do, the 17th, or do you want to push one? Because Eric and I were having a conversation beforehand, giving him a little bit more time would be a benefit. Would you guys want to push it off a week to go December 1st and just have one December 1st for November and December? Because then December, you're getting right around Christmas too for the next planning commission meeting. I don't know if there's anything coming down the pipe that we would need a December meeting as well, Dave, for approvals, but
Not right now, we don't. Yeah, no, December 1st or 8th would probably work. It's still early enough where you're not getting into the Christmas holiday.
When's Public Works? Is that going to be the first?
Public Works would be the 5th, Parks and Rec should be the 6th, and Finance should be the 7th. So if you want to have
You don't
a
want
big
4 in a
meeting.
row?
Be kind of a busy week though.
The first?
I don't, first would be fine with me if it's all right with everybody else.
Because the 29th we'll have economic development, November 29th, so
Oh, we did the same thing yesterday.
this week, yep.
No, that's fine with me if everybody else is in favor of that.
It's okay by me.
Sure. All right, we'll do the first then.
Good. Works fine, my schedule, and give us a little bit extra time so I can interact with Chad and Dave and get those last couple of chapters cleaned up before we meet. So,
All right, thank you.
all right.
You have a good time tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Behave yourself.
Make my wife pay for dinner too, just to make me feel a little better. I think it's her turn.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you much, appreciate it. Thank you. The fall and Halloween coming up.
Dave, continue discussion on the draft fee.
Yeah. Basically, in the last meeting, we kind of introduced a new fee schedule. And I was looking for some input from folks on stuff they did or didn't like. Fair amount of time in this, so I was kind of hopeful that if there wasn't a lot of negative feedback, we at least kind of move toward adopting this. So I don't know if folks had, I know everybody's busy. I don't know if anybody had time to kind of read through it and at least give some thoughts on, if they thought that's the way we want to move toward, but looking to make the department more stand on its own merits, and I think this is a good tool to move in that direction. And it, like I said, it kind of mirrors some of the surrounding communities on permit fees and so on.
That roof fee, now, does that doesn't, fee doesn't come in unless you actually tear the boards off the roof, so to speak?
So so we've had probably close to half a dozen houses where we've had issues with just these tear off and re-roofs. And granted, a lot of it was from one company, but there's quite a few code requirements, even on a, what you would call a re-roof. The number of layers that you can put on it, how it's vented, if decking's needed, or if it had cedar shakes. I mean, there's quite a few triggers. And I think we should have any roof, re-roof, have just a basic permit fee. And that way we can kind of track stuff and make sure that the contractors that are working on these, because a lot of these guys came up from Illinois, and they were just hiring whatever crew they could find, to come in and kind of grab some roofs. So this would give us a little more control over the quality of the work, and to make sure that the people that are at least contracting the roofs are licensed, because they can go back to Illinois and
You're never gonna find them.
never gonna find them again. So I thought it might make more sense to kind of at least capture what's going on. And then even if it takes just one inspection, I wanted to kind of cover our costs for that, because there's quite a bit of, not like a lot, but there's paperwork and then inspections and keeping an eye on stuff too. So
I had a question if you wanted to add electric charging stations for a permit and solar as well. If that should be considered, because I think we're gonna get more and more solar. We have a permitting process, but we don't necessarily charge a fee for that. So
So-
we have some requirements from the utility standpoint as far as solar.
Yep.
We
I have
have,
solar on my list, and that might not. have
we
been
had
sure
discussed
what-
it at one
Yeah.
point, but I don't know if we came up with what other communities were doing for a fee or something of that
So we
nature.
do have, so it is considered an array, or it's actually a structure.
Yep.
So it should be regulated, because it is regulated fairly heavy in the code. I did open up one of Rutzlaff's 8 units. We did a final walkthrough, gave him an occupancy permit last Friday. He put charging stations in his garages, which I thought was a great idea. Someone might make or break getting a rental if they've got a place to plug in their hybrid or their
Mhm.
solar car. So I'll add that to the schedule. We have to inspect them too before they get energized. So there's at least minimum one visit for every solar array we get. And we don't have any language in there for any ground mounted systems, which I'm surprised there hasn't been. I mean, they were hot and heavy where I came from.
Yeah.
Everybody seemed to be getting them, but
Yeah, we have one on Oak Street, but I don't believe that's within the city.
yeah. And then we're
It's probably
gonna
in the township on Oak
obviously
Street.
address this stuff in our zoning ordinance when we redo our zoning ordinance. So
Is there
anybody
any,
have time to look through and have any thoughts?
is there any
either good or bad?
comparison with the surrounding communities?
Yeah, we did quite a few, probably 6 or 8, and we kind of picked a middle ground. Berlin was the one that was
Yeah.
kind of closest that we wanted to mirror.
Because last month, I think we handed out Berlin's and Wapakas. I don't know if you guys remember that.
And
or
I
had
have
that one,
more
so.
if you want to look those over. I'm happy to share those. I got about probably 10 or 12 different communities that we kind of looked at some stuff.
I apologize. I was not here last month. So.
I have a question about the early start, what that would allow.
So a lot of times the state will have to look over plans. So immediately when they get those, they'll look at for foundation stuff, for soil conditions and different things. And what they'll do is they'll give them a conditional approval. So they don't have to wait 6 weeks for the state to finish reviewing their plans. And that way so like this time of year, an early start is huge because you might have to wait 6 weeks and now the ground's frozen. Now you're gonna be held up. So that gets, so as soon as they get us a drainage plan and at least the footprint of the house and they approve those, they can get started on their building and start ordering their stuff and do all that stuff instead of
That's
having to
just the
wait. So
interim
it's
from
it's
the
really kind of-
finalization from the state.
Yeah, statewide, it's pretty common practice to get a early start. And even on the commercial stuff, they'll do that too. And since it's an extra inspection for us, we wanted to have an early start permit fee. So
Do you have anything else for Dave on that?
I just have a question about the added roof stuff and you wanting to get out there and inspect more. Are you gonna be able to keep up with that stuff? Or are we gonna have a future need of more people? Because then you're gonna have these contractors that are saying that we're not keeping up with getting out there and finalizing our inspections.
we're only doing a final on the roof permits.
Okay.
But if they come in and get a permit, I can give them. My goal someday is when someone comes in for a roof permit, here's the packet for a roof. So it has all the steps you need. It'll have the code sections that they're thing, and then I can ask them, how many layers are on it right now? And then we can go through that. So it'd still only be one inspection. We're not, even when they get a roof tore off, we're not gonna do a deck inspection like some places do.
Okay.
Because I don't want to be responsible if a rainstorm comes in and I'm on vacation, that they gotta wait for me to get back. So we just tell them to go ahead and move. And then if I know it's cedar shakes, obviously I'll say, hey, you're gonna have to go in and redeck the roof before you to cover it, because the code said it has to be a solid wood surface. So it'll just kind of help me kind of track that stuff and like make sure that people are getting at least someone that's certified, because you can go after their builder's license.
Right, yeah, and
Mess up
my
something,
only
but-
concern is adding that kind of stuff that you have the ability to get out there. We're not holding up work and that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah, so basically now I'm just going to drive by at my leisure after it's done, just to
Okay.
make sure they got their, vents in, everything's kind of finished off. And so
And it's kind of
I think
holding them
it'll be an
accountable
extra
because.
effort at all, because I can hit 3 or 4 a day, where it wouldn't really,
Sure.
20 minutes to drive by.
Then you have somebody's name and information that's held accountable and.
Yeah, and I see it when I drive around too. Kind of keep an eye on, I'll stop sometimes and
And we're still using Kunkel Engineering yet to help with things, so they're there as backup as well. Dave, for some of them, can you explain, like the 30 in zoning, 75 in zoning, what does plus zoning include for some of the stuff?
So a good share of my time is spent dealing with zoning issues. So we wanted to start capturing, just like any other permit. So everywhere I've ever worked, they have a zoning permit fee, and it's separate from the building fee. If there's a zoning component to that, so I have to go in and look how it's zoned, what they want to do, see if the use is met. I have to do setbacks. There's a whole litany of stuff that I have to go through that. And we just wanted to have kind of a flat fee of kind of an hour, So I settled on 65 because that's where I came from. That was kind of what it was. And like I said, there's a lot of work to those. And like the CSMs, we've been doing those for free, and that takes up quite a bit of time. And any stuff that goes in front of the zoning commission, that would kind of spread some of that cost, for the time in here too that we spend. So that's kind of why I came up with that. We weren't really capturing that on most of the projects that we were doing. And change of use is one that we haven't normally done either. That's another one where if we don't have some type of trigger to look at a business trying to move in somewhere, they'll get moved in there and then we'll find out you're not even zoned in this district. So some of it's some front end stuff where if a permit's required, at least I can get the information and go, well, you're gonna have to pursue another property because this one doesn't meet the zoning requirements. So that's why we have that as well. And it could trigger need to be sprinkled depending on what they're doing. I mean, there could be quite a few triggers in a change of use that would or wouldn't be allowed.
Your variance request is quite a bit less than what like Wapaka County is, isn't it?
Yeah.
They like
Chad,
$800
do you
or
recall-
something?
You told me Wapaka made, it was some crazy number.
I know, it's
I was
$800.
shocked. Was it 800?
I can't remember, but
Seemed like it was over $500,000
For
that they
their
got for permit fees.
building and zoning department, they bring in a lot of revenue. You know, and they're paying that department from those user fees. So I can't remember the number either, but the number he said was, I'm like, what? That's your revenue for, fees and, yeah. So,
And obviously, like I said, at the end of the day, you don't want to be gouging our citizens. That's the last thing we want to do. But we want to be able to regulate, and then everything has a cost to it. So every business has a cost, and, I think if we just try, we're not going to try to make a profit, but we're trying to cover costs for the department.
But you got anything else for Dave? You,
I would suggest really looking into this because probably the next month, we're gonna want to kind of solidify this. So if
every
if
month.
anybody has ones that, like examples that like Tim wants to see, definitely get those and
Yeah,
keep
please
chewing on
just
it.
email me, and that way I can kind of combine it all together, and I'll bring it to the next meeting too. So just shoot me a quick email. Hey, these 3 items here seem a little high, seem a little low. Do we really need this? And I can explain the method to my madness, I guess. So,
I know when I looked at it and you compared to the examples you gave us, I thought they were all pretty reasonable. And 2/3 of them, I didn't know we even charged for that.
yeah.
that's what's going to be an ongoing situation anyway. I get this all the time, so.
Yeah, I'd sort of like to get this moving toward getting this adopted. Part of this will come into our zoning ordinance too, and then I'm sure everybody realizes that the comprehensive plan that we're doing, that's gonna steer our entire zoning ordinance. So we're gonna be looking through the comprehensive plans lens when we're laying out the zoning stuff.
When you got anything else?
I just see a lot of fees, and we're just talking about how we wanted to encourage growth in the community. And I just worry that, I mean, it used to be like $150 for a building permit. Now it's like $850. I mean, people are not going to be building or updating their roof or whatever if there's going to be all these fees. I worry about the growth of the community. It's a big jump. I mean, if you look at all those fees, there's a lot of fees there. So I'm just worried about that.
So just for instance, on the roof permit that we just talked about, the fees of 75. Almost all the roofs I'm getting in are $12,000 to $15,000 to get a roof done. So I'm looking at, it's not even 1% of the roof cost to have the permits. And like I said, I was looking at this too from the citizens. Most of these, not all, but a lot of the permits we get are from contractors or building, or the contractors building a house. They're going to pay this somewhere else to another community anyway. Like I said, we don't want to raise them where we kind of really
That's
felt.
what my point would be there is, as long as the other communities are doing it.
Right.
And then, then you're gonna have people saying, well, you're not taking care of your houses and stuff. Well, if you can't make them do it or whatever, you gotta be able to have something there to say it needs to be done. Also,
I don't know as I like it any better. I own a pole barn business in Michigan, and I used to pay $30 for my pole barn permits. And now they're $400 or $500. I mean, everywhere you go. And I guess that's just the cost of doing business. But yeah, we don't want to hurt our citizens. And that's why we kind of picked kind of a middle of the pack. We don't want to be the Oshkoshes and the ones that are, they're 2 or 3 times what we're paying. We kind of want to be somewhere in the middle and still kind of cover our costs, because it's hard for a city to pay for, ideally you'd have a zone administrator making 70 or 80. You'd have a building inspector and maybe even another building inspector. So, you could have 200,000 just in keeping someone sitting in an office. So
And that's one of the things that
Gotta balance.
we're trying to set this up for, because we know that we're lacking in the building inspection and zoning department just because of the workload. And Wapaka, they have a zoning administrator full-time and a building inspector full-time. I mean, Wapaka was slightly smaller than us. They have that. They've got the fees that are, bringing that in. So the last thing I want to see is, number one, we don't want to be the highest by any means for the fees, because that's going to scare people away. But I don't want to get in a situation either where we're being successful in getting development, and these developers and contractors are coming in here trying to do this work, and they bring these permits, and then there's the lag, there's the Achilles heel, and all of a sudden everybody hates us because we can't get through the process quick enough because we're so overbooked. So that's one thing that we've been talking about. We're not ready yet. We want to see how these fees pan out with the revenue, but it's something that we need to kind of have on the forefront too, is how we're going to fund this potential growth that we're hopefully going to see.
Most of the permits, I'm issuing them, if not the same day, within a day or two. Where a lot of other places are 7 to 10 days, just because you're just so busy. But and I'm not necessarily asking for more staff. At some point, we may need it if things kind of growing and the way that we're hoping they do. But this just kind of helps just cover costs, I guess.
And I think if we stay like we were talking about what the other communities are doing, I don't think we're out of line, put it that way. So I don't know, that's my feeling on about it.
Well, no, we gotta, you can't print money. You've got to have money, and you can't keep adding taxes. So this is sensible,
So the question I have kind of piggybacks on the concern that Tim has. When it comes to these buildings, builders and inspectors coming in, who's actually getting the permit? Is it the building and inspector or the homeowner?
A homeowner can pull their own permit. I try to encourage the homeowners to have the builder pull a permit, because then they're responsible for the permit as opposed to the homeowner. The code allows the homeowner to pull a
Okay,
permit.
because I know that if a builder or a contractor comes in, whether they're getting a permit or not, their quote is their quote. So the extra $75 or $150 or whatever it's going to be is included in that quote.
Most
So-
contractors will have a permit clause in them, and most of them are gonna charge you for a permit, whether they get one or not. 'cause I'm catching quite a
That's my
few people
point.
without
They've
them,
already got it included. So if they don't
Right,
get the permit, I've already paid for it.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to get it. Is kind of the point that I was looking at. It was thinking.
Yeah.
And just wanted to clarify if it was their responsibility to get the permit or the homeowner. So that answers.
technically, the builder is supposed to get their permit. Now, a lot of times they'll have the homeowner do it. And there's reasons, either they're not legit or they're so busy, they can't come down and spend an hour or two at the building department pulling a permit.
And I don't want them working on my stuff.
So we're supposed to notify the homeowner. Push comes to shove, you're responsible for this permit. So if this guy comes in and does a shoddy job, that's not his permit, it's your permit. And I said, and if that guy falls off your roof, he's gonna go after your homeowners as opposed to, where you would normally have liability insurance to cover. So I encourage, allow it, obviously, because the code does, but I try to at least educate the homeowner. You're better off having them pull their own permits. And if they're licensed, they'll do it.
Mhm.
So
You got anything else on this?
So we should be ready next month to approve this, right? Is that what you're saying you'd like?
that's the goal. But like I said, if we get a bunch of input, if you guys have time, I know everybody's busy, if you have time to read it and, three, 4, 5 items that you don't like, or maybe we can help discuss how I came to the numbers I came to, I'd be happy to discuss it. But yeah, ultimately we want to adopt a fee schedule. So it could look totally different from this depending on the planning commission's direction, but I had to propose something. So that's what I did.
Okay, so let's discuss upcoming agenda items. You got anything, Dave?
There's not really a whole lot in the hopper. Permits have slowed down significantly. We just hit 302 the other day, so we're about 10 ahead where we were last year. We still got, what, 2 months to go. So I'm hoping we end up around 330. So more and more of the contractors are kind of begrudgingly, getting permits where they weren't before. So, but yeah, I like the way things are going for the department, but
Definitely fee
I haven't
schedule.
heard from any of our developers on any of the proposed projects. I'm anticipating 2 or 3 bigger projects here shortly. But as of yet, I haven't received anything, so I don't have anything for the agenda.
We'll have the fee schedule. That'll be on the first. That's,
If that's
Cedar
the
Court?
only thing on there, I don't know if we'd want to have a meeting. We can decide that, but hopefully a couple of these bigger projects send me something that I can put in front of you folks.
But Cedar Corp will have,
Cedar Grove.
Cedar Corp. will be here again, Yeah.
Eric was gonna be here for the next one, so.
Okay, and we already had our date set.
Yeah,
So I guess the next thing would be number 9, looking for adjournment.
make that motion.
I'll second.
Made and second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.